Good morning, everyone. Today we will start with a new topic that is ascites. So, all you know what is mean by ascites. So, by seeing this diagram, you can easily understand what is mean by ascites. So, ascites it simply means that abnormal collection of free fluid in the peritoneal cavity. So, in this diagram, you can see here is the peritoneal membrane, and between this peritoneal cavity there is collection of free fluid. So this condition it is always pathological, that you should remember. And ascites it is not common, or you can say physiological, because many of the individuals they do not contain peritoneal fluid in this cavity. So that's why if there is a collection of fluid in this cavity, it is always pathological. The word ascites it is of Greek origin, askos, which means a bag or sac. So basically, it indicates that peritoneal cavity which is enlarged because of collection of fluid. This condition of accumulation of free fluid within the cavity. So ascites is basically a condition of pathological accumulation of free fluid within the peritoneal cavity. Healthy men they have little or no intraperitoneal fluid, so that you should remember. So many of individuals they do not have any fluid in this peritoneal cavity, or some individual they may have some little fluid in this peritoneal cavity. So it must be nearly, or you can say only 20 to 25 ml of fluid it can be present in peritoneal cavity. So if that fluid it is more than 25 ml, it can be considered as ascites. Ascites present when there is fluid in the peritoneal cavity, that we have already seen. So when more than 25 ml of fluid it is built up in the peritoneal cavity, it is called as ascites. So that we just have discussed that many individuals they may have little amount of fluid in the peritoneal cavity, but it should be nearly less than 20 to 25 ml. But if that collection of fluid it is more than 25 ml of fluid in the peritoneal cavity, it can be considered as ascites. So this ascites it can be mild, it can be moderate, or it can be uh, largely accumulation of fluid in the peritoneal cavity. If there is a small amount of fluid it is present in peritoneal cavity, such patients they may be asymptomatic, means they do not produce any kind of symptoms. But if that fluid accumulation it is more, uh, basically or usually less than 1 liter, then patient may have abdominal distension, fullness in the flank, shifting dullness of percussion. So there are various signs by which patient may present to you, like abdominal distension or fullness in the flank or shifting dullness. So these are the signs which usually seen whenever there is accumulation of fluid in the peritoneal cavity and it is nearly less than 1 liter. But if ascites is marked, that means if fluid collection it is more than 1 liter, nearly 1.5 liter, in that case fluid thrill or a fluid wave may be present. So not may be present, it is always present. So whenever the fluid accumulation in the peritoneal cavity it is more than 1 liter, nearly 1.5 liter, in that case you will get fluid thrill or fluid wave. So that we will see in physical examination part of this ascites. Ambulatory patients with an episode of cirrhotic ascites, they have a 3-year mortality rate of 50%. That means the patient who have cirrhotic ascites, but he is ambulatory, means he is not bedridden, he can walk right? So that is called as ambulatory patients. So such patients, they have a 3-year mortality rate of 50%, means 50% individual they will die in next 3 years. The development of refractory ascites, that means the ascites which is not responsible, which is not responding for the conventional treatment like diuretics or paracentesis or using shunt. So if such ascites is there which is refractory to the treatment, it carries a poor prognosis with a 1-year survival rate of less than 50%, means 50% individual they can survive for 1 year only, and remaining 50% they can die in less than 1 year. So this is a very serious condition. Other features they include eversion of umbilicus. What is mean by eversion, all you know. Hernia, abdominal stia, that is stretch marks, and divarication of recti and scrotal edema. So that I will show you in the next slide what is mean by divarication of recti. In some patients, they may have dilated superficial abdominal veins, which may be seen if the ascites is due to portal hypertension. So, if portal hypertension is the reason for the development of ascites, in that case, you will get dilated superficial abdominal veins. So this slide shows all the features of ascites. So this diagram, this is the first diagram. So on the left side you can see the normal rectus abdominis, but you can see there is a space between this rectus abdominis. So this is the space, or you can say the rectus abdominis which is separated from each other, that is called as divarication recti. So in this diagram you can easily see that there is a significant space between rectus abdominis muscles. So this condition, it is called as rectus or a divarication of recti. On the second diagram you can see the umbilical hernia, that is because of ascites. In this diagram you can see the stretch marks, that is abdominal stia, that may be caused because of abdominal distension, and in this diagram you can see the distended abdominal vein. So it is usually seen in patient with a portal hypertension. So these are all the features of the ascites which can be noted. The next part regarding the risk factor for the ascites. So the liver damage, it is the single most risk factor for the ascites. So many patients, they don't have any additional risk factors, or there is no other cause for the development of ascites, but only the liver damage. So this liver damage, it usually occurs because of cirrhosis. What is mean by liver cirrhosis, that you all know. So this cirrhosis, it is responsible for 80% cases of ascites. So that means out of 100, 84 cases of ascites, they belong to the cirrhosis, and remaining 10 to 15% of cases, they may be because of hepatitis B or C, alcohol use, heart failure, pancreatitis, to some extent tuberculosis, and cancer like ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, or endometrial cancer, and less frequently in some patient hypothyroidism, it may be the reason for ascites. So by seeing these factors or etiologies, you can all understand uh, like this cancer, tuberculosis, pancreatitis, heart failure, alcohol use, so all they are responsible for damage of liver, and because of damage of liver, patient will have ascites. So all these factors, they usually damage the liver, and then ascites is produced. Now we will see what is the pathogenesis of ascites. So the pathogenesis of ascites, it is divided into two parts, that is ascites in the presence of cirrhosis and ascites in the absence of cirrhosis. So that means ascites, it occurs because of liver damage due to cirrhosis, that we have already seen that cirrhosis, it is a major risk factor or a major cause for the ascites, which is usually seen in 84% of cases. But second pathogenesis is that there is no cirrhosis and still patient has ascites. So the first we will see the ascites in the presence of cirrhosis. So what happens in the cirrhosis that leads to ascites, that we will see. So in ascites, due to cirrhosis, so ascites in a patient with cirrhosis, it is basically the result of portal hypertension and renal salt and water retention. So what is the basic mechanism or basic factor in cirrhosis which leads to ascites is that one is portal hypertension. Many patients or almost all patients with cirrhosis, they will have portal hypertension, and second factor which contributes to the development of ascites in cirrhosis is renal salt water and retention. So these are the two basic mechanisms which leads to the development of ascites in a patient with cirrhosis. Similar mechanisms it contribute to the ascites formation in heart failure. So means these two mechanisms they also contribute for the development of ascites in a patient with heart failure also. So that we will see how it happens. So the first portal hypertension, which signifies the elevation of pressure within the portal vein. So that you all know what is meant by portal hypertension. So elevation of pressure within the portal vein is called as portal hypertension. So normal pressure in the portal vein, it is nearly 5 to 10 mmHg. So 5 to 10 mm of Hg pressure in the portal vein, it is considered as normal. So more than 10 mm of Hg is considered as portal hypertension. According to Ohm's law, which is an SI unit for electrical, uh, the pressure is the product of resistance and flow. So what is mean by pressure? So pressure basically it is a product of resistance. So all you know what is mean by hypertension. So in that topic you already know what is mean by hypertension, or you can say what is mean by increased pressure. So this increased pressure it is nothing but an product of resistance. So you can understand in this diagram that suppose this is an artery and blood is flowing through this artery, but if there is a resistance, that means the diameter of artery it is reduced. So what will happen, there is no space, or you can say there is no adequate space to pass the blood through this artery. So what will happen, the pressure will increase because there is an resistance to flow, right? So in this diagram you can see there was an adequate diameter to easy flow of the blood, but in this diagram you can see the space is narrow. So what is happening, there is some resistance for the flow. So basically this pressure it is nothing but a product of resistance and flow. So what will happen in liver, there is an increased hepatic resistance which occurs by several mechanisms. So we all know, we just saw that pressure it is the product of increased resistance and flow. So in liver what is happening, the hepatic resistance is increased, that is because of several mechanisms that we will see one by one. So the first mechanism for the development of this resistance is that development of hepatic fibrosis, so which defines cirrhosis. So because of cirrhosis what is happening, there is an hepatic fibrosis, and because of this fibrosis what will happen, there is a disruption of normal architecture of hepatic sinusoids which impedes normal blood flow through the liver. So in this diagram you can see here is an hepatic sinusoids. I will change the color. So here you can see this is an hepatic sinusoid through which blood is flowing. So these are the central veins of liver, and this is an portal vein. So from the portal vein the blood will flow towards this central vein, and from central vein it will enter into the aorta, sorry, inferior vena cava. So if these hepatocytes they are not flexible, means they are fibrous, what will happen? They will not expand during this flow, and they will narrow this space. And if this space is narrowed, what will happen? The blood, it will not easily flow through this sinusoids. So this is again a diagram, it shows the same mechanism. So this is the circulation. So here you can see the central veins, and this is an portal veins. So if the connection between these two parts is obstructed, what will happen? There will be increased intrahepatic pressure, or you can simply say portal hypertension. Second, there is an activation of hepatic stellate cells. So these are stellate cells which are usually responsible for storage of vitamin A, but it also mediate the fibrogenesis. So what is mean by fibrogenesis that you all know? So if there is an activation of hepatic stellate cell, it will mediate fibrogenesis, which will leads to the smooth muscle contraction and fibrosis. So it is obvious that if fibrogenesis is start and fibrosis is there, there will be contraction. Yes, in this diagram you can see these are the stellate cells. So whenever there is an injury to hepatocytes, these stellate cells they get activated, they induce fibrogenesis, which leads to the contraction of smooth muscles and fibrosis. So this is an balanced, you can say, vasoconstriction and dilatation in the hepatocytes. Here you can see the stellate cells. But if it is injured, what is happening in this diagram? There is an imbalance. So what is happening here? There is an constriction. So by this diagram, you can easily understand this mechanism. Finally, cirrhosis, it is also associated with decrease in endothelial nitric oxide synthetase, so which is an enzyme which results in decreased oxide production and increases intrahepatic vasoconstriction. So what is the role of nitric acid? Nitric oxide, you all know, this nitric oxide, it is usually responsible for vasodilation, which is released by endothelial cells of vessels. So in cirrhosis, what is happening here? This endothelial nitric oxide synthetase, it is decreased, and because of this decreased synthetase, what is happening? Nitric oxide, it is also decreased. If there is decreased level or low level of nitric oxide, what will happen? Obviously, there will be vasoconstriction. So all these factors they leads to the portal hypertension. The development of cirrhosis, it is also associated with increased systemic circulating levels of nitric oxide. So it is basically contrary to the decrease seen in intrahepatically, as well as increased level of vascular endothelial growth factor and tumor necrosis factor that result in splanchnic arterial vasodilation. So it is a basically paradox condition which you can see that level of nitric oxide they are decreased in the liver, but systematically level of nitric oxide is increased. So basically this is a paradox condition which usually occurs because of shear stress. So because of this, what is happening, systemic nitric oxide level it is increased along with vascular endothelial growth factor and tumor necrosis factor. So what will happen, there will be increased splanchnic vasodilation. So it is obvious that the role of nitric oxide, it is vasodilation. So if its level is increased, what will happen? There is a dilatation of splanchnic circulation. So what is splanchnic circulation? So basically it is the circulation of or you can say in the gastrointestinal tract, which includes liver, stomach, spleen, pancreas, small intestine, and colon. So this is the splanchnic circulation. It is commonly called as splanchnic circulation, the circulation from all these organs. So what will happen, because of this increased systematic nitric oxide, there is a vasodilation in the splanchnic circulation. So in hepatic artery, you will get vasodilation. In celiac artery, superior mesenteric artery. So what will happen? There is a vasodilation in this circulation. But within the liver or in the liver, there is a vasoconstriction. So basically, this is a paradox condition that usually occurs because of shear stress. So what will happen because of this condition? That is because of vasodilation of this splanchnic circulation. So it results in pooling of blood. So that is obvious. So whenever there is vasodilation, you will get pooling of blood and decrease in effective circulating volume, right? And this is perceived by the kidney as hypovolemia. So it is obvious that there is a decrease in effective circulating volume, that is because of this splanchnic vasodilation. So kidney will perceive it as a hypovolemia. So if kidney perceives it as a hypovolemia, what will happen? It will initiate compensatory vasoconstriction. Correct. So via release of antidiuretic hormones. So what is the role of antidiuretic hormone? You all know. So kidney will initiate compensatory vasoconstriction through this release of antidiuretic hormone. The consequence of this is water retention and activation of sympathetic nervous system and renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, that is RAS, which in turn lead to the renal sodium and water retention. So the what is happening here? First, there was splanchnic vasodilation. Because of splanchnic vasodilation, what is happening? There is a decreased effective circulating volume, and this decreased effective circulating volume, it is perceived by the kidney as hypovolemia, and because of hypovolemia, there is a compensatory vasoconstriction through the release of antidiuretic hormones, which results in the free water retention, and then there is an activation of sympathetic nervous system and RAS system, and all these factors they lead to the renal sodium and water retention. So these are the two basic mechanisms, that is sodium and water retention and portal hypertension, which were responsible for the pathogenesis for the ascites in a patient with cirrhosis. So in the first slide of this pathogenesis, we have already seen. So there are two basic mechanisms which are responsible for development of ascites in a patient with cirrhosis. So one was portal hypertension, and second one is renal salt and water retention. So how they appear, that we have already seen. So first we saw how portal hypertension was there in cirrhosis, that is specifically because of hepatic fibrosis, then activation of hepatic stellate cells, and then third factor was there was decreased level of nitric oxide. So three factors they were responsible for portal hypertension in cirrhosis. But what was happening in the cirrhosis, even though there was decreased level of nitric oxide in the liver, but there was increased level of nitric oxide, or you can say systemic nitric oxide, and because of this increased level of systemic nitric oxide, there was splanchnic vasodilation. So because of this splanchnic vasodilation, what is happening? There was decreased in effective circulating volume, and because of this decreased circulating volume, kidney will perceive it as hypovolemia, and because of this hypovolemia, there was a compensatory vasoconstriction via release of antidiuretic hormone, and because of this, what was happening, there was retention of water, activation of sympathetic nervous system, activation of RAS system, and which in turn lead to the renal sodium and water retention. So this is all about the pathogenesis in the presence of cirrhosis. Now we will see what happens if there is no cirrhosis. Ascites, in the absence of cirrhosis, it generally results from the peritoneal carcinomatosis, peritoneal infection, or pancreatic diseases. So, if the patient does not have cirrhosis, and if still the patient has ascites, so that ascites, it may be because of some malignancy, that is carcinomatosis, or some peritoneal infection, or pancreatic diseases like pancreatitis. The peritoneal carcinomatosis, it can result from primary peritoneal malignancies such as mesothelioma or sarcoma, abdominal malignancy such as gastric or colonic adenocarcinoma, or it may be a metastatic disease from lung or breast carcinoma or melanoma. So the first reason for the development of ascites in the absence of cirrhosis is peritoneal carcinomatosis. So this carcinomatosis, it can be the primary or it can be metastatic. If the primary peritoneal malignancy is there, so it can be mesothelioma or sarcoma, or abdominal malignancy such as gastric or colonic adenocarcinoma, or it can be metastatic like breast carcinoma or lung carcinoma or melanoma. Tumor cells which lines the peritoneum, they produce a protein-rich fluid that contributes to the development of ascites. And fluid from extracellular space is drawn into the peritoneum, which further contribute for the development of ascites. Tuberculous peritonitis, it also causes ascites via similar mechanism in which tubercles, they are deposited on the peritoneum and they exude a proteinaceous fluid. So all these tumor cells, or you can say tuberculosis, they exude a proteinaceous fluid which contributes for the development of ascites. The pancreatic ascites, that is ascites due to pancreatitis, or you can say pancreatic disorders, it results from the leakage of pancreatic enzymes into the peritoneum. Now we will see how to evaluate in a patient who comes with the ascites. So till now we have seen what are the risk factors, what is the pathogenesis of this ascites, but now we will see how to evaluate the patient with ascites. Once the presence of ascites it has been confirmed, the etiology of ascites, it is determined by paracentesis. So paracentesis, it is basically a bedside procedure in which a needle is inserted in the left lower quadrant of abdomen and ascitic fluid is withdrawn for the examination. So the etiology of this ascites, it is determined by this paracentesis. in which a needle or small catheter it is passed transcutaneously to extract ascitic fluid from the peritoneum. So usually the left lower quadrant it is preferred because of the greater depth of ascites and thinner abdominal wall. So this is a diagram which shows this paracentesis procedure. So here in this diagram you can see a needle is inserted into the left lower quadrant of abdomen and ascitic fluid is withdrawn. Now after withdrawing this fluid, what you should look? So first of all you should look for the gross appearance of the fluid. So if that fluid it is turbid, so in this diagram you can see the fluid is turbid, that means you can see turbidity means cloudiness or haziness of fluid. So in this diagram you can see there is no clear fluid, it shows some cloudiness. So if turbid fluid is there, it usually results from the infection or tumor cells. So if turbid fluid is there, or you will see the turbid fluid or turbid ascitic fluid, it will usually indicate infection of tumor cells. But if the fluid it is white or milky white, it indicates a triglyceride level more than 200 mg per dl and often more than 1000 mg per dl, which is the hallmark of chylous ascites. So chylous, you all know, it is a Greek word chyle, which means a juice. So if the ascitic fluid it looks like milky or white, so it indicates lymphatic disruption, which may be because of trauma, which may be because of cirrhosis or malignancy or tuberculosis. So this uh, chylous or milky fluid, basically it indicates lymphatic disruption. So in this diagram you can see the milky white appearance of ascitic fluid. So this type of ascitic fluid it may be because of liver cirrhosis, tumor, tuberculosis or trauma. So only by examining, or you can say the appearance of ascitic fluid, you can have some differential diagnosis, or you can say some have differential etiologies for this ascites. If the color of ascitic fluid it is dark brown, it will reflects high bilirubin concentration and it indicates biliary tract perforation. So if patient has ascites and the color of that ascitic fluid it is dark brown, so it will indicate biliary tract perforation. And if the fluid is black, it will indicate the presence of pancreatic necrosis or metastatic melanoma. So only by examining the color of ascitic fluid, you will have many differential etiologies. After examining this gross appearance, this ascitic fluid it should be sent for the measurement of albumin and total protein levels. So why we should measure this albumin and total protein levels, that we will see in next slide. Then cell and differential counts, and if the infection is suspected, that only on the basis of color of this ascitic fluid. If we suspect infection, next gram staining and culture with blood culture it should be performed. So first we will see the measurement of albumin and protein. So in that, first we should measure the serum ascites albumin gradient. So shortcut is SAG. So SAG stands for serum and ascites albumin. So that means the albumin it should be measured from the serum, that is from blood, and ascites of or you can say albumin which is present in ascitic fluid. So that is called as SAG, and the difference between these two albumin it is called as gradient. So simply this SAG it is calculated by subtracting the ascitic albumin concentration from the serum albumin level. So that means we have to measure serum albumin level also, and we have to measure ascitic albumin also. So after measuring this, we have to subtract the ascitic albumin concentration from the serum albumin concentration. So why we should perform this? Because it is useful for distinguishing ascites which is caused by portal hypertension from non-portal hypertensive ascites. So that means we can understand that the cause of ascites is a portal hypertension or whether it is non-portal hypertension. So that is because this SAG it reflects the pressure within the hepatic sinusoids that we have already seen and correlates with the hepatic venous pressure gradient. So if this gradient that is SAG it is less than or approximately 1.1 gram per dl, it will reflect the presence of portal hypertension. So if that SAG is less than 1.1 gram per dl, it will reflect portal hypertension. So that portal hypertension, it may be because of cirrhosis or cardiac ascites or hepatic vein thrombosis. And if that SAG it is more than 1 gram per dl, it indicates that ascites is not because of portal hypertension, and it may be because of some other reasons. So which may be tuberculosis, or it may be peritoneal carcinomatosis, or it may be pancreatic ascites. Then we should also measure ascitic protein level. If it is more than 2 gram per dl, it indicates that hepatic sinusoids they are normal and they are allowing the passage of protein into the ascites. So that is obviously you found increased protein in the ascitic fluid. That means from some place it is coming in this fluid. So it is coming from these hepatic sinusoids because there is no obstruction. So these hepatic sinusoids they are normal, and it is usually seen in cardiac ascites, Budd-Chiari syndrome, or sinusoidal obstruction syndrome. So early Budd-Chiari syndrome. If an ascitic protein level it is less than 2.5 gram per dl, it indicates that hepatic sinusoids they have been damaged, means they are not allowing the passage of protein into the ascites, and they are scarring is there, and they no longer allow passage of protein, which usually occurs in cirrhosis, late Budd-Chiari syndrome, or massive liver metastasis. Then one should also measure a pro-brain type natriuretic peptide, that is BNP, which is released by heart muscle whenever there is increased ventricular stretch, or we can say whenever there is increased cardiac load. So heart muscles they release this peptide. The high levels of BNP in the serum occur in heart failure, and it may be useful in identifying heart failure as a cause of high sag ascites. So if patient has high sag ascites that we have already seen, and if the BNP it is also increased, so it will indicate that heart failure as the cause of this ascites. Then after this, we should also measure ascitic glucose and LDH level, that is lactate dehydrogenase. So they can be measured when you suspect secondary peritonitis. So that secondary peritonitis it may occur because of viscous perforation. So like we have already seen biliary tract perforation, or you can see the secretion of pancreatic enzymes into the peritoneum. So these are the conditions in which secondary peritonitis you can suspect. So secondary peritonitis, it is usually suggested by ascites glucose, which is less than 50 mg per dl, ascitic LDH, which is higher than serum LDH level. So to confirm this finding, you should also measure serum LDH level. So if serum LDH level it is lower than ascitic LDH level, it will indicate secondary peritonitis, and obviously there is detection of pathogens in the ascitic fluid culture. Then ascitic amylase level, that you should also check for the presence of amylase in ascitic fluid. So it should be measured when pancreatic ascites is suspected and it is typically more than 1000 mg per dl. Then we should also go for cytology for the peritoneal carcinomatosis. So at least 50 ml of fluid is needed to obtain and send for immediate processing. So if peritoneal carcinomatosis is suspected, there should have been an immediate processing, and for this at least 50 ml of ascitic fluid is needed. If tuberculous peritonitis it is suspected, it is usually associated with ascitic fluid lymphocytosis. So if you get lymphocytosis in ascitic fluid, the probable reason is tuberculous peritonitis. In a patient with cirrhosis, an elevated ascitic adenosine diaminase level has a sensitivity of more than 90% of cases. So measurement of this ascitic adenosine deaminase, or you can simply pronounce it as ADA. So this ADA has a 90% specificity, sensitivity for the diagnosis of peritonitis, tuberculous peritonitis. So obviously you need AFB examination to confirm the tuberculous peritonitis, but this AFB it has not much sensitivity as like ADA. When the cause of ascites it remains uncertain, means through this investigation, if the cause of ascites is cannot be ruled out, so in that case one may need laparotomy or laparoscopy with peritoneal biopsies for the histology and culture. So these are the gold standard modalities for the diagnosis of the etiology for ascites. So when the all other measurements that just we already seen, they they fail to diagnose the cause or etiology of ascites. So in that case one may need laparotomy, laparoscopy with peritoneal biopsy for the histology and culture. Now what are the complications of this peritonitis? So one include spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, which means the infection of ascitic fluid without an apparent source. So it means a patient will have infection of this ascitic fluid, but there is no an apparent source. So such patients they may present with increased abdominal girth, so that is obvious because of ascites, abdominal tenderness. But along with the symptom, patient will present with fever, nausea, vomiting, or new onset of or exacerbation of pre-existing hepatic encephalopathy. So this is the typical presentation which shows this spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. Then second complication of ascites, it may be hepatic hydrothorax. So by these words, or you can by focusing on these two words, you can understand what is mean by hepatic hydrothorax. So one word is hepatic, so that means obviously the liver is involved, and second one is hydrothorax. So what is mean by hydrothorax? You all know. So this hepatic hydrothorax it refers to the presence of a pleural effusion. So that is collection of fluid in the pleural cavity, usually more than 500 ml, in a patient with cirrhosis who does not have other reasons for the pleural effusion. That means patient have pleural effusion and patient has ascites, but there is no cause for this pleural effusion apart from ascites. So that is called as hepatic hydrothorax. So if patient has pleural effusion because of some cardiac diseases or pulmonary diseases or pleural diseases, it is not called as hepatic hydrothorax, right? But if there are no such diseases like cardiac diseases, pulmonary diseases, or pleural diseases. If these type of conditions they are absent and patient has ascites, and along with ascites, if patient has pleural effusion, so that condition it is called as hepatic hydrothorax. It occurs when ascites it migrates via fenestra in the diaphragm into the pleural space. That means the fluid from this peritoneal cavity it will migrate into the pleural space, which will cause this hepatic hydrothorax. And this condition it can result in shortness of breath, hypoxia, and infection. So that means patient will present with shortness of breath, hypoxia, and infection. Now the next part is management. So what is the management, or you can say treatment part of ascites? So if mild ascites is there, the sodium restriction less than 2 gram of sodium per day it is sufficient. So only one modality is sufficient to manage the mild ascites, that is dietary restriction. So why dietary sodium restriction? That is already we have seen, because in the pathogenesis of ascites we have seen that sodium retention was the mechanism which was responsible for development of ascites. So if we will restrict this sodium in less than 200 gram per day, it will sufficient to control this mild ascites. But when there is a moderate amount of ascites, in that case, diuretic therapy it is essential, which includes spironolactone and furosemide. So these are the two drugs which can be used for the treatment of ascites. So furosemide it is used when, along with ascites, patient has peripheral edema. But if that ascites is refractory to these two modalities, that means ascites it is not responding to this diuretic therapy and sodium restriction. In that case, patient may need repeated large volume paracentesis. So what is mean by paracentesis? That we have already seen. So for the diagnostic purpose, nearly 50 ml of fluid it is extracted or withdrawn from peritoneal cavity. But if ascites is refractory to these two conditions, in that case, large volume of paracentesis is done. So that means nearly 500 ml or nearly 1 liter of fluid it can be withdrawn from peritoneal cavity. Or second procedure is TIPS, that is transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic shunt. So this procedure it is uh, similar to the kind of angioplasty in which a stent it is used. So in this diagram you can see there is a stent between this hepatic vein and portal vein branch. So in this diagram here you can see there is an hepatic vein, and here you can see portal vein. So between these two branches a stent is used to create uh, a passage or a pathway for an adequate blood flow. So basically this modality it is used for the treatment of portal hypertension. So if alternative pathway is created or extra pathway is created, what will happen ultimately? Portal hypertension it will be decreased, and if portal hypertension is decreased, ultimately ascites will be reduced. So this is all about ascites. In next part or in next lecture we will see the history and physical examination of ascites. So in short, we will see the clinical approach to the patient with ascites. So today here is the end of lecture. Thank you.